Hello and welcome to Leaders of Tomorrow, 18 hours daily platform for the Indian micro, small and medium enterprise sector. On this series, it's our endeavor to celebrate entrepreneurship, bring you expert advice from renowned business leaders and help you grow your business. The success of any organization is a direct function of the people who are a part of it. And on today's episode on MSME Dialogues, we're talking about the large number of IPOs which have hit the primary markets this year. Should you go the IPO way and what you need to know before you do so? That's what we're talking today. We're talking all things IPO. All right, then on the panel with me today, let me introduce my guests. Starting with my left, I have Ashwin Parekh, the managing partner of Ashwin Parekh Advisory Services. I have Pawan Bindal, Director Operations at Dun & Bradstreet, India. Joining us from our studios in Delhi, Prithvi Haldia, Chairman of Prime Database. And from our Bangalore studios, Samit Ghosh, CEO of Ujjivan Financial Services. Gentlemen, thank you all very much for being here this evening. I want to kick this off with you, Ashwin Parekh, and ask you, we've seen a huge number of IPOs which have been coming in from the MSME and the SME space into the markets. What are you making of valuations?
In case of funding the MSME and SME, we found that the banking system, which is supposed to be the prime source of funding, somehow or the other have not been able to reach, let's say, this segment in a very effective manner. 2-3 reasons. Geography could be one of the reasons. The second important reason that could have perhaps is the secured lending which the banking system follows. Be it so, the need for the funding, And then we thought IPO was one of the alternatives, one of the places where, let's say, the MSMEs can go and find their funds. Does it really have to be that is one of the questions that I keep on asking. Because the trouble with that platform is that the investors, who have to have a good understanding of the risk profile of these borrowers or these, let's say, institutions, these organizations we are raising fund, the ability to understand the risk is perhaps not there at this point in time. The kind of reporting that you see, in the normal course, the media may talk a lot about mid-sized corporates and large corporates, but doesn't really cover MSMEs and SMEs to the extent the investors may expect, them to have. So to that extent, I thought there was a need for, let's say, the government and the regulator to create a new platform altogether. IPO being, of course, one of them. Should the same kind of market persist, should the same mechanism persist for IPOs is a big question mark to my mind, because the cost of that is very, very large. I thought the new guidelines, which are now talking about peer-to-peer lending platforms, could be a good alternative. A good alternative in place of IPOs. What may happen is, the way it functions could function is the same. In the sense, the borrower puts out his requirement onto the platform. The lenders, any lender, high net worth individuals, institutions with surplus, anybody can go onto that platform, look at the kind of investment opportunities which are available on the platform and place a call.
Sure.
So that's something that I thought was a much better alternative. But going back to your question, IPO is a hypothetical, let's say, solution. It's not yet become an effective solution, I would say.
Okay. Prithvi Haldia, you track the IPO space very closely. You track the primary markets very closely. Would you agree?
Well, a couple of things before I comment on your question and what Ashwin Bhai has said. One is that I think this time around, after many unsuccessful attempts at IPO platform for SMEs, we have finally found a structure which has started working. So, if you go back to 92 when the OTC was established, and then many other attempts were made, this time around, because of the regulations and the regulatory framework which has been put in place, I think we are seeing a much healthy development of the IPO market for SMEs. I would like to remove the M part of it, because I think the IPO market is really not for the micro sector, it is for small and medium enterprises. As of today, 154 companies have raised money from this market. We are talking about 1,000 odd crores which have been raised. Is debt a substitute for equity? I do not fully subscribe, because a lot of these SMEs already are, they already have, borrowings from banks or from other places. There's a need to infuse more equity so that you can do more borrowing, you can do some more leveraging. And therefore, I think equity will be required for both growth as well as for subsequent stages. These companies were not able to hit the main boards because of a lot of regulatory requirements, as well as not being able to attract the right kind of investors. The risk involved in the SME segment for retail investors is nil, because SEBI has very wisely put a 1 lakh rupee a cap on both the investment in the IPO as well as the trading lot. So we are looking at slightly more serious investors, and it's very good to see that a lot of these companies have performed extremely well after their IPOs. 8 or 10 of them have already migrated to the main board, and many more companies would be using this route to grow further.
Okay, Pawan, but what would you have to say? Are you also unenthused by the numbers that we've seen in terms of listing from the MSME and SME space?
So I would like to sort of dwell on points raised both by Parik Bhai and Prithvi. I think in terms of the opportunity, everybody agrees that it is huge. But I want to put some numbers in perspective. As per our own database, Dun & Bradstreet maintains a global database of 240 million companies, 12 million in India. 90 to 95% of them are MSMEs, based on the definitions that we have. In fact, even within incorporated entities, that is the ones that are registered with the MCA, 90 to 95% are actually below the 5 crore sort of paid up capital mark, which means we are talking about really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to discussing, the kind of companies or SMEs that could actually list on, let's say, the SME platform. So the size is quite small, or the number of companies is small in relation to the total universe. With regards to banks, Ashwin Bhai referred to it. We're just going through some statistics, and as per the 2015 numbers, March 2015 numbers, collective total loan outstanding to the SME space, MSME space, as per RBI statistics, is around INR 5 lakh crores. And if you compare that to the funds or the issues that were raised in 2015 by the SME platforms, that's 280 crores. That's a fraction of 2,000. So we are really talking about very small numbers applicable to very, very small number of companies. But it is a good start. Like Prithvi also said, that it is a tool that must be encouraged. There must be market making involved around it. The biggest issue is that, let's say, the mid-sized companies for whom the tool probably makes greater sense is the issue of corporate governance, transparency, and the cost of compliance that they need to factor in when thinking about raising an IPO. Just to give you a perspective, of the 1 million companies that are actively sort of there on the MCA, only 600K have actually been regularly filing their balance sheets. So you're talking about a culture that needs to be improved at a ground level. It's almost like saying, we need sports toppers in the university, but when our primary and secondary education sort of lacks those beginnings. So I think there has to be a balance in terms of trying to develop these institutional mechanisms, and yet at the same time institutionalizing a culture of transparency and governance, even in the micro and small. So by the time they grow and scale up, they're actually able to absorb and understand what is required to actually get into the big league of IPOs.
Okay. Samit Ghosh, you've just gone through an IPO. At what point did you decide it was, the right time for you to go through the IPO route? Was it more a push than a pull factor? What was it?
Well, our journey started in 2005, and we always had in our mind that we would, be widely held company at some stage of the other. So IPO was always a goal for us, but it takes a long time. We started in 2005, and as pointed out earlier, we right from day one, we had that goal in mind. So in terms of governance, in terms of transparency, we kept that in mind from day one.
Fair enough, Samit. You're saying that, yours was more a necessity because of the regulation that exists. But I want to know some of the challenges that you faced along the way. You operate in a very specific sector, which is the finance sector. But if you can, help the entrepreneurs and help the MSME entrepreneurs who are watching this show understand what some of the challenges, what was your personal story like leading up to the IPO?
So, as I mentioned, right from, you have to really work on it from day one, when you start, and you set an objective for yourself, that at some stage I will scale up on my business, for which I require a substantial amount of capital, and the best access to capital is through the stock market, and also have a diversified ownership, So you have to set yourself that goal, and you have to have that goal in mind right from day one.
Fair enough. You're talking about good governance and, the governance policies at some of the MSMEs, which could be a cause of concern. We'll continue discussing all of that. Let's take a very short break for the moment on this episode of Leaders of Tomorrow MSME Dialogues, but we'll continue this conversation on the other side. Just stay tuned. Welcome back. You're with us here on Leaders of Tomorrow on ET Now, and on MSME Dialogues today we're talking about the opportunities and challenges for the MSME space when it comes to going the IPO way. Just before we took the break, we were talking about some of the challenges that exist really for MSMEs when it comes to going the IPO way. Prithvi Halde, if I can bring you in and ask you, one bit of it, of course, is listing. But once a company lists, in your opinion, what should be the kind of support which exists for these companies? For example, SOPs in particular sectors, maybe manufacturing support. What do you think will go a long way towards ensuring the sustainability of these companies which have listed?
So once you've got listed, the key thing is that every penny that you make should be in the books of accounts. You should not create subsidiary companies or other companies where you take away money. You have to be very, very high on corporate governance. The markets will, and gradually you grow at the SME platform, and then you move on to the main board. I mean, we've already seen migration happening. Better companies would obviously go. Some companies have misused this platform, and
Sure.
I think all platforms across the world, there will be very good companies and bad companies. But we should not really be worried about those bad companies. I think this platform has already thrown up a lot of surprises, both in terms of how the companies have grown after their IPOs and also in terms of returns. So I think the institutional platform exists. The exchanges are giving a great support to these SMEs. The regulatory platform, SEBI, has been, fully conscious of how this market should grow in a robust manner. So I think all things are placed. My concern is only with respect to the SMEs themselves getting into a different mindset, getting into a different